This is PTV World. I am SYED SHABAHAT Ali, and you are watching Fault Lines. Africa is a continent that is facing many conflicts. And many of these conflicts revolve around an organization that has created a lot of mass, a lot of penetration in several countries of Africa. And this organization, this militant outfit is called Al-Shabab. Not only Al-Shabab is creating problem for Kenya, where it has fought 150 times since 2006 against the military, but also it's trying to penetrate into conflict-ridden Ethiopia and also in the state of Nigeria. Nigeria is another country that is trying to grapple with the problems that it's facing due to weakening government. Now, important thing about Al-Shabab is that Al-Shabab has penetrated in the bordering area of Ethiopia and Kenya and is also trying to make a stronghold in this area to take advantage out of the weakening state of law enforcement in this region. To talk about this, I have invited one of the key experts on the subject. His name is Adam Rousselee. Adam is a researcher, analyst. He's an expert on African affairs, and he writes frequently for Jamestown Foundation Terrorism Monitor. Adam, I welcome you to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Adam, before we talk about the events that have taken place, can you give us a bit of background of Al-Shabab and the activities that it has been performing?
Sure. So Al-Shabab is a major terrorist organization out of Somalia. It's an Al-Qaeda affiliate. It's actually the largest and most well-funded Al-Qaeda affiliate in the world. Originated in the early 2000s and came to prominence during the Islamic Courts Union, which was overthrown by the Ethiopian military in 2006. It has since taken to having a guerrilla campaign against the African Union occupying forces in Somalia, as well as the coalition government. And controls much of the most fertile farmland in the country's south in the Juba Valley.
And Adam, we have also heard that in the bordering area of Somalia and Ethiopia, this group is trying to gain more mass and more momentum. So what is their specific interest in the bordering area of these two countries?
Well, geographically, Somalia is quite an arid country, with the exception of the southern Juba Valley region, which is more salubrious, more useful for agricultural production, more fertile. It's pretty much a flat plain in its border connection with Ethiopia's Ogaden region, and that part of Ethiopia is primarily populated by ethnic Somalis. The Ethiopians were interested in overthrowing the Islamic Courts Union in 2006. It was also partially at the behest of the United States that this was done. And they've been a major occupying force in the country ever since. Their incentive now for combating Al-Shabaab is, I believe, primarily security focused, in that they're seeing major threats coming from the group into their country. A lot of the group's propaganda is focused on Ethiopia, and Ethiopia itself is having a lot of issues in terms of holding together well as a state.
But Adam, the Somali side of the border has become a stronghold, or has become a land that is attracting Al-Shabaab's activities more. Why specifically the Somali side of the border is becoming a hotbed of conflict, or is it attracting Al-Shabaab's activities more?
Yes, by the government's own admission, it has a lot of trouble policing the countryside. Al-Shabaab has a very powerful stronghold in the country's deep south. This is also where most of the food production is done. Ethiopia is highly food insecure, and this is a big part of the reason for that. Should ATMIS, the African Union Transition Force, withdraw from the country, as they plan to do fully by 2024, the government has admitted that it will have severe difficulty holding the country. And so it's been a near 2 decade long guerrilla warfare between Al-Shabab and the international peacekeeping operations that have been trying to prop up the government.
But specifically, when we talk about the state of Somalia or the military of Somalia, its war has not been very successful against Al-Shabaab. What exactly do you believe can be the reason for this failure of military of Somalia against Al-Shabaab?
Well, I don't know if I would say the government's necessarily weaker. It has made some efforts at penetrating the countryside. One of the issues that some international observers point to is a ban on arms sales or some kinds of arms sales to the Somali government. I think probably the biggest concern among the international community is that these arms would eventually fall into the hands of Al-Shabaab. But it also does hinder the federal government's ability to actually combat Al-Shabaab using their own forces as well.
But many of the experts are of the view that given the circumstances that we have seen so far, given the state of Somalia that we have observed so far, they are afraid of a complete military takeover by Al-Shabaab on the state of Somalia. Do you agree that?
I would say that it is a high likelihood. I try not to make forecasts on, probabilities of that nature, but I would say that the likelihood of an Al-Shabaab takeover is high should you have a full international withdrawal from Somalia. And it should be noted that the Somali government has said as much as well. That said, there are foreign forces that do plan on staying. Ethiopia has committed international troops, and Kenya has as well. There are plans to monitor the situation closely, and these are neighboring countries as well. So I would say, although the likelihood of the government falling is certainly high, I wouldn't discount the regional community just yet.
Thank you very much, Adam, for being a guest in our program. Ladies and gentlemen, this was Adam Roussel, and he was telling us about the activities of Al-Shabaab in Somalia. Now, the other side of the border is Ethiopia, and Ethiopia is another very interesting country. So it's a country that has perhaps the highest economic growth rate in Africa, and still the country is facing many conflicts. We did a program on Ethiopia's conflict, where Ethiopia's federal government or the central military was fighting against one of the regions, the Tigray region. And today we are going to invite an expert who will tell us about Ethiopia's fight with Al-Shabaab, because to our understanding, Al-Shabaab is trying to benefit out of the conflicts that the government of Ethiopia is facing at the moment. To speak on this very pertinent issue, I have invited Dr. BENIAM AWASH. Dr. BENIAM is Assistant Professor of Sociology at State University of New York. Dr. BENIAM AWASH, I welcome you to the show.
Assalamu alaikum. Thank you for having me.
Wa alaikum salam. Doctor, what exactly is happening in Ethiopia with regards to the Tigray's conflict before we talk specifically about Al-Shabaab? Because in the last show when you came, you told us about Tigray's conflict with the central government of Ethiopia. So tell us, where exactly do we stand in terms of that conflict? Is it over or is it still in process?
Well, the war in northern Ethiopia, perhaps one of the most lethal, deadliest wars at a global level, and we have several wars that are continuing, was a 2-year war from November 2020 to 2022. There was a cessation of hostilities that was signed by two of the key parties to the conflict, the Federal Democratic Republic of Ethiopia, the government, as well as the Tigrayan People's Liberation Front, the TPLF. And when we look back at this war, it was notable for several factors. It was notable in terms of its brutality. The level of brutality was something that was shocking to Ethiopians. There have been various wars, civil wars, but the level of brutality was really remarkable. The various human rights organizations that have investigated the nature of the conflict itself found very brutal forms of human rights violations, crimes against humanity, various types of massacres, etc. So this created a very deep social wound within the communities. And so the Northern War, despite starting within the region of Tigray, so it encompassed 3 out of the 12 regional states in Ethiopia, the regions of Amara, Afar, and Tigray. It resulted in over 1 million deaths, over 5.4 at the height of it, of the war, displaced, internally displaced, billions of dollars of damage to infrastructure and livelihood. And so the fact that there was a cessation of hostilities signed in 2022 was a sigh of relief. It brought peace, it brought a semblance of peace.
Professor, I'm sorry to cut you here, but when we talk about the Fano people, this tribe of Fano, which was initially supporting the government of Ethiopia against the Tigray people, has now taken up the arm against the government, and now the government is fighting against them. So for an outsider like ourselves, it's a very complicating situation. Tell us, what is the stance of these Fano people and why they have switched sides, why the tables have turned?
The Fano are the average person in the one of the largest regions in Ethiopia, the Amara region, and it's part of the cultural landscape in northern Ethiopia. So anyone who is a farmer, a teacher, a young person, youth, it's a process of self-help and self-protection. So, for instance, in the anti-fascist guerrilla movements in Ethiopia during the period of the late Emperor Haile Selassie, you had various types of patriotic movements that would challenge the fascist Italian army. So in the context of the very recent period, Fano were actually very supportive of a reform movement, very peaceful demonstrations in the Amara region. They were also supportive of the Kero youth movement in the neighboring Oromia region for, again, a new reform movement, a political change in Ethiopia. In the context of the war in northern Ethiopia, they were specifically targeted by the federal government and the regional representative of the Prosperity Party of Amara region to rise up and to be armed and to be part of the coalition to defend the country from the TPLF. So in that context, they were key allies. Now, what changed that relationship is part of the cessation of hostilities agreement. So the cessation of hostilities agreement in it does not address the security concerns of the Amara region because the process of disarmament in terms of the TPLF has not fully fully occurred, nor has it been verified, nor has the government actually been very transparent in that regard. Secondarily, there are areas that are contested between the regions, between Tigray and Amara. And so this contestation has been seen as being resolved in favor of the TPLF. And so the federal government's position, which has oscillated from recognizing these claims for the Amara region to now perhaps slowly giving it over to the TPLF, politicizing it, if you will, are something that actually creates a significant amount of tension and unease. But more importantly, is the process in the past 5 years, and it goes further, of the demonization of Amaras in Ethiopia.
But Professor, many of the supporters of President Abiy Ahmed would say that what he is trying to do necessarily is to integrate these regions. These are 11 regions with 11 militaries, with paramilitary forces, and this certainly is not possible for any head of the state to use all of these forces together, I mean, to keep a harmony between all of these regions. Would you agree with this argument?
Absolutely. So in theory, many people, particularly part of the reform movement, had noted that the ethnically based states that were creating a government within a government, military within a military, had to be reformed. So you have one citizenship and you have one military for the entire country. So that in theory was broadly supported. The problem is in the process. So immediately after signing the cessation of hostilities, without, for instance, the TPLF, which is essentially a militia within Tigray, similar to, let's say, Fano or Amara special forces within Amara region, without the disarmament of that, let's say, militia, there was a turn towards the disarmament of broad announcement, but it was selective. So the examples that these special forces essentially were established in 2010, in the 2010 period. And they were established in Somali region. So the Liyu Hail or special forces were established specifically with the mandate to counter insurgent groups. This is very important for perhaps a later discussion regarding Al-Shabab and foreign forces that might threaten Ethiopia. So the special forces or Liyu Hail had this mandate. Now, then you had this process of these special forces being established in various regions. So the Abiy administration's willingness to listen to general demand to actually disarm and demobilize these special forces was welcome generally. But the manner in which this was selectively applied. So, for instance, Oromo special forces, they have not been demobilized. Somali special forces, they have not been demobilized. The Tigrayan, essentially special forces, they have not been demobilized and disarmed. So the Amara special forces, Liyu Hai, their demobilization was seen as partisan and political in nature, specifically regarding some of the issues that was raised, such as the opening that it would provide the Abiy administration to hand over contested regions, the ability to have greater level of control and power over the region at the expense of, let's say, the desire of the region. So it's a very heavy-handed process, and that is why you have a pushback against that.
That pretty much sets up the stage for the background. And now if you would like to tell us about Al-Shabab, how did Al-Shabab utilize all of the situation that you have so far told us about, and how did it exploit the opportunities extended to it by all the circumstances that you just mentioned?
So Al-Shabab has been operating in Somalia. Very recently, it engaged in very strong operations. So it controlled areas of central Somalia, southern Somalia, bordering Kenya. And if you look at its objective and its activities, for the most part, particularly its terror actions, were restricted to Somalia, neighboring Kenya, and Uganda. It had very little opportunity to actually mount successful operations in Ethiopia, despite its various attempts. And there's several reasons why. The first is the very, very strong military and intelligence capabilities of Ethiopia. And secondarily, the importance of what we just talked about, the Liyu Hail or special forces in Somalia. They were specifically designed to counter various insurgent groups, but specifically as well Al-Shabab. And so that's what you've had. Very recently, something has occurred that has changed the fortunes of Al-Shabab. And that is that the new Somali government, for about 2 years during COVID, there was a political crisis in Somalia. So any attempt of counterinsurgency was essentially left aside. So very recently, with the new administration in Somalia, I believe in August 2022, you had the launching of a offensive to get rid of Al-Shabab and to control, of course, various regions. And so this process involves local partners. Kenya and Ethiopia and specifically Ethiopia, are key partners in this offensive. And so what Al-Shabab has done is actually to create a process of giving it some depth. One is to enter Ethiopia, if possible, and to set up a foothold. So it's not necessarily about terror attacks, and they've mounted several attempts, but it's actually to set roots. And it's very interesting in that regard, because the they successfully were able to penetrate into their objective was a central area of Ethiopia and the Bale mountain region, and they were able to set root there. One of the things that this essentially Somali movement has done is to create a front. It's called the Ethiopian Front. And that Ethiopian Front has been recruiting ethnic Oromos and ethnic Somalis in order then to give it some sort of legitimacy within Ethiopia.
Professor, many of such militant outfits that are operating in the various parts of the world are mostly not alone. They have international recognition or not recognition, just say they have international support, international patronage. There are people and states supporting them. How about this Al-Shabab that is now trying to operate within 3 different countries as we have been discussing, Kenya, Somalia and Ethiopia? Does it have patronage from any international actors, or is it independently pulling up financial resources enough to fight this war?
It's complicated, right? So in terms of the way in which Al-Shabaab operates and who it has relationships with, again, it's a primarily Somali-based and Somali-oriented insurgent group that uses terror tactics as part of its strategy of trying to control areas. Now, it's been very successful in Somalia because of the weakness of the Somali government. So where the Somali government is unable to provide various types of services, from security to regular types of public goods, Al-Shabaab has capitalized on that. And so they're able to control areas such as Kismayu in the south, or in Galmudug in the central parts of Somalia. And so this process of controlling has allowed them also to generate a whole range of income streams. So as an example, they engage in illicit activities in terms of economically speaking. They engage in, for instance, the charcoal production and export. They engage in various things such as piracy, kidnapping. But like a regular government, they also engage in taxation. And so the estimates are perhaps about $100, $150 million annually that they generate for themselves. And because of that, they're actually very well funded. Maybe 40%, 50% of those can go to salaries and the purchase of arms. So they have both this is an organization. They have a commercial arm, they have a political arm, they administer different regions within Somalia, and they've been operating for years within Somalia. So that's the way we should think about it. In terms of the relationship to foreign parties, that gets a little bit complex because that gets a little bit complex. But I think in terms of funding, the funding source is more local than it is about external sources of funding. So we can think of Ahmed Rashid's book, for instance, looking at the jihadi struggle within Afghanistan in the 1970s and 80s. That's a little bit different than the groups that we see here. Now, if we look at, for instance, in Nicaragua, the Sandinistas and Contras, in which the Contras were funded by external players, particularly by drug sales in eastern part of the United States in LA, and the purchase of weapons that were then delivered to them. So we don't necessarily see that in the Somali conflict, and we don't see that in the context of Al-Shabaab as well.
Thank you very much, Dr. BENIAM, AWASH, Assistant Professor of Sociology from State University of New York, to be guest in our program. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll take a break and we'll join you back with the second segment of program. Stay with us. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. The clashes have started taking place between the TTA or Afghanistan and the Central Asian republics. To make it more specific, the state of Kyrgyzstan and the state of Tajikistan are the ones that are taking the brunt of the oppression of Taliban's regime. According to the official statistics that have been shared in different conflicts, so far 400 people have been injured And this is in continuation of what has happened already with Iran. This had been predicted in a program by one of our experts who will be the guest in this part of program as well. And we also see a continuity of problems taking place between Tajikistan and TTA for so many reasons. While all of this was happening, two bomb blasts have taken place on Friday, the day of 12th Rabiul Awwal. One took place in KP, where a mosque was targeted. The other one took place in the heart of Balochistan, in an area that is not known for any kind of sectarian violence. And in both these incidences, heavy life losses have been observed. To talk about this very pertinent subject, I have invited my expert, Syed Khalid Muhammad, who had made these predictions in our previous program. Khalid is Director General of a think tank called Command 11 and is joining me over the Skype. Khalid, I welcome you to the show. Khalid, what has happened in Mustung and KP before we talk about Tajikistan and TTA? What do you think has happened there exactly?
As we've said in the past, we know that Pakistan is now fully at war. ISKP, TTP, BLA have now declared an open war against Pakistan. And with Pakistan as a security state being involved in the political government rather than the protection of the state, it's given an opportunity to these terrorist groups, to the insurgency groups, to attack the state and literally bring us to a point where we have nothing else to do but to go to war. The attack today in Mustung, the attack in KP, we expected this. There was an announcement about a week ago from the TTP saying that they were now going to start making sectarian violence a regular in Pakistan. Now, what happened today, is part of a religious rally in Mustung that was attacked. We can expect more of this. It's just going to get worse. And as long as the Taliban cannot provide any kind of control on their side of the border, we are going to see nothing but problems inside of Pakistan. And we're just seeing more and more problems because the state isn't ready.
Ironically, Khalid, nobody has taken the responsibility so far. So, who do you think is behind this? Does it look more to be something done by TTP, or you expect ISKP to be involved in it?
Well, I think right now it's a little too early for us to be assigning blame. From the type of attack that was carried out, this looks like an ISKP attack, but I don't think that we're going to get any claims of responsibility for the next 24 hours. We know that ISKP is now a direct competitor to Al-Qaeda in Afghanistan and to the Taliban in Afghanistan. So they will be raising their stake inside of Pakistan, whether it be through sectarian attacks, whether it be through supporting insurgent groups, or whether it be through supporting the TTP as they've done in the past. We have nothing else to expect now but warfare inside the country. Today's attacks were very surprising for us because this is a religious holiday. It does not make sense to wage war during a religious holiday because this is something that the Taliban itself has never been party to. So for us right now to assign blame to any of the groups is very difficult because we do know that Pakistan is at war, but we're not going to see the TTP claim responsibility immediately because they know that will put them into very negative standing with the Taliban. If ISKP does step forward in the next 24 hours and claim responsibility, which is what we expect, that ISKP will claim responsibility for this attack, it will be their announcement that they are ready to wage war against Pakistan.
Now let's talk about the skirmishes that have taken place between Tehrik-e-Taliban Afghanistan and the state of Tajikistan. And how do you see its connection with what had happened with Iran several months ago? We did a program on that as well. So what exactly is happening behind the curtain?
Well, you have to look at this from a different point of view. If you remember 2-3 months ago, the Afghan Taliban, in an effort to appease Pakistan's security establishment, decided to resettle the TTP from the Pakistan border to the northeast of Afghanistan and to the west of Afghanistan, Badakhshan and Takahar provinces in the northeast, and Faryab and Bardais in the west. Now, these provinces, when they were announced, we were ready to point these would be used against the states. What we're seeing right now is that is what's happening. On top of that, the Tajik-led majority that was existing inside of Badashkan as part of the government was replaced by the Taliban once the TTP was moved into the province. That created a lot of ill feelings. The group that is being cited in these fights is the Taliban Tajikistan, who for a long time has enjoyed support of the Afghan Taliban. But since they have now, the Tajik majority was removed from power in the government, the hostilities have increased. We have heard the Greater Tajikistan call made. We have now heard that the Jamaat al-Ansarullah, which is an Al-Qaeda-linked terror group, has potentially taken the Taliban Tajikistan under their wing, and they will be supporting the spread of terrorism inside of Tajikistan, because since 2006, the Jamaat al-Ansarullah has been trying to replace the secular government and replace it with an Islamic government. Now, keep in mind that the TTT, Taliban Tajikistan, even up until about March of 2023, they had the full support of the Taliban. But we saw a massive shift inside of the Tajik border once the Pashtun government was brought into power in Badakhshan. And since then, we have seen a lot of Tajiks moving towards the ISKP side, moving against Afghanistan and moving against the Taliban.
We'll take a break here, and Khalid Muhammad will continue this conversation with us after the break. Stay with us. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, and we continue this conversation with Syed Khalid Muhammad. Brother Khalid, the Tajik Taliban that you call TTT have recently issued a video message wherein they have declared open war, or they have given threats to the government of Tajikistan. What's your take on that? How serious of a threat this is for Tajikistan?
So the video threat that has come forward from the TTT is not something that was unexpected, especially with the problems that exist between the Tajiks and the Taliban themselves now. We can expect attacks to happen. We think that this cannot be taken lightly, because once Afghan soil is continued to be used against other countries, so far it's just been Pakistan. Once attacks are launched against Tajikistan or Uzbekistan, we are going to find that the Afghan state is going to become a pariah state, which is what the United Nations Security Council basically said, that Afghanistan will become a pariah state because the spread of terror groups inside of the country has become uncontrollable. Once this soil becomes unmanageable for the Taliban, we are going to see these attacks escalate. And it's not just one or two countries. We are going to see the entire Central Asian being brought under attacks from either ISIS, Al-Qaeda, or Taliban Tajikistan. So we need to be clear on this. We also need to keep in mind that Gulbuddin Hekmatyar, the butcher of Kabul, in 2022 made a statement that when you shelter armed opponents of a neighboring country, it can only mean you have declared war against them. Well, if you look at Afghanistan, armed opponents of Tajikistan exist there, armed opponents of Pakistan exist there, armed opponents of Iran exist there, armed opponents of Uzbekistan exist there. There isn't a country in the region that doesn't live inside of, that doesn't have an armed group inside of Afghanistan. Sadly, Gulbuddin Hekmatyar does not hold that same position when it comes to the TTP in Pakistan. But what we're going to see is a massive escalation in the region now. The Taliban, to this point, has been trying to control just the TTP and fight against ISKP. What we've seen now is the groups that have been pushed out, that have been blacklisted, that have turned against the Taliban themselves, are now going to be looking for a home for themselves. And ISKP provides an outstanding home for them. And ISKP's ideology does fit directly in with what the Tariq Taliban Tajikistan wants. It fits directly with what the Tariq Taliban Pakistan wants. It fits directly with what the Balochistan Liberation Army wants. We're going to see a lot of people moving towards ISKP now. And that is going to create another major issue inside of Afghanistan for both Al-Qaeda and for the Taliban.
While you're talking about ISKP, what do you say about this recent media campaign by TTA wherein they have declared ISKP to be a Tajik group? How rational of a act this is, and how will this affect Tehrik-e-Taliban Afghanistan at large?
I think it's absolute stupidity, to be very honest. The Afghan Taliban does not have the media power or the media teeth that ISKP has. If the Taliban is going to try and portray the ISKP as a Tajik group, we have to keep in mind that the ISKP has been recruiting inside of Tajikistan and inside of Afghanistan, Tajiks inside of Afghanistan and inside of Afghanistan to fight on their side. Now, when you turn around and start labeling them as a foreign Tajik group, you have created them as an option. You've given the groups an option. Instead of the Taliban, instead of Al-Qaeda, we can go towards ISKP. They are a more, how do I say, a more vicious force. They are a more violent force than what the Taliban could do to anyone in the region. ISKP has no problem with being branded, but what the Taliban needs to understand is so much stronger than theirs. That if you remember, after the Bajawar attack, they released a 198-page document declaring Jamaat al-Ulama Islam as a group that was legitimately targetable by ISKP and TTP. So this is a group that is not afraid of the Taliban or of Al-Qaeda. So trying to paint them as a foreign group or a Tajik group is just giving them another feather in their cap and saying, go ahead and recruit more people.
Brother Khalid, my last question. If ISKP is a threat for Tehrik-e-Taliban Afghanistan, and it is also inflicting Pakistan, as you are already suspecting ISKP to be behind the two attacks, then why would not Tehrik-e-Taliban Afghanistan join hands with Pakistan to collectively combat this evil and flush it out of this entire region? Why would TTA not join hands with Pakistan instead of trying to solve this problem at their own and yet not being able to sort it out?
Well, if you look at the exchange that recently happened between the Afghan representative and the Pakistani ambassador in the United States in the United Nations Security Council the other day, you will see that it was nothing more than finger pointing. You will see that it was nothing more than accusations against one another. The Taliban has roughly a month and a half ago invited U.S. forces into Bagram Air Base, where they are now working directly with Afghanistan's General Directorate of Intelligence to target ISKP. Now, after 20-some years of the U.S. being inside of Afghanistan with their own forces and not being able to eliminate ISKP, it makes no sense to call the U.S. back in to try and help you. The better idea was to use Pakistan, put Pakistan on one side of the border and the Taliban on the other side of the border, and sandwich ISKP in the middle. That would give you the opportunity to take out BLA. It would give you the opportunity to take out TTP. It would give you the opportunity to take out ISKP. All of these groups affiliated against Pakistan or against other states could have been eliminated in a coordinated operation. But the Taliban at this point is trying to distance itself from Pakistan, trying to show that they have the ability to make decisions and the power, military power to be able to defend their own soil, which they are absolutely and completely failing.
Thank you very much, Syed Khalid, for being guest in our program today. Ladies and gentlemen, third topic of our program is the diplomatic standoff or rift between Canada and India. That has triggered out of something that we were not expecting. Now, according to the official statements issued by the Government of Canada, they are suspecting the involvement of Indian agencies behind the killing of a Khalistani leader, Hardeep Singh Nijjar. Hardeep Singh Nijjar, 44 years old, was shot dead outside a temple in Canada, and the Government of Canada is quite convinced that it's India behind this attack. United States has so far been very reluctant to issue a sweeping statement in this regard, but nonetheless, the diplomatic relationship that United States enjoys with Canada calls for something more than words in this regard. It's also very pertinent to understand that while the diplomatic relationship between Canada and India are strained at the moment, Pakistan has been repeatedly telling the global community about India's hidden hand in all the acts of terrorism in Pakistan. Last time in December 2022, we had done a program in FAULTLINE show. We had informed you that Pakistan has provided undeniable and undisputable evidences of India's involvement in terrorism inside Pakistan, and Pakistan Foreign Minister has also given a dossier to the Secretary General of the United Nations. To talk about this very pertinent subject, I have requested Syed Muhammad Ali, an independent analyst, to speak about this issue. Ali, I welcome you to the show.
Thank you for having me, Shabab.
Ali, before we talk about Canada and India's diplomatic rift that is on the peak these days, would you like to comment on what Brother Khalid has said with regards to the incidents that has taken place in Balochistan and in KP? And I'm talking about these bomb blasts that have killed many innocent people.
Absolutely. I think the timing, the choice of target, the day, I think makes one believe that there is a connection, because definitely after the last week's international condemnation and concern regarding the allegations that Indian State Intelligence Agency was involved in the assassination of a Sikh leader in Canada. I think the Indians need political distraction and diversion to reduce the international spotlight and concern which it has received, not just after the assassination in Canada, but also after the ongoing crisis in the Manipur because of the brutalities that the Christian community is facing there. So I think in the wake of the upcoming elections and to repair the international damage that India has received, it seems logical that an incident like the tragic attacks in Pakistan yesterday provide a useful distraction to divert international attention away from the Indian internal as well as external behavior.
Ali, we had done a show in Fault Lines. We had invited Six for Justice a couple of months ago when they did their referendum in Canada, and there were many votes polled in favor of Khalistan movement. Now, do you think this Khalistan movement, led by the Khalistani leaders, led by the Sikh leaders in Canada, has called a global embarrassment for India, and what has happened recently is perhaps an outcome of the sheer rage of the state of India?
Indeed. And Shabahat, if you look at the leading international and particularly the Western media today, you read The Economist, you read The Atlantic, you read the Wall Street Journal, they all have a common concern that India is involved in assassinations of its opponents in other countries, number one. And secondly, like you asked, its brutalities, oppression, and target killing was earlier limited only to its own territories or its occupied territories. And in the second stage, it expanded the use of terrorism and killing as a policy instrument in the neighboring countries. But now they have gone global. You must have noticed that yesterday the Indian diplomat was disallowed entry into a Gurdwara in UK as well. And so see, and the voices are being raised by a US Congresswoman Ilhan Umar demanding an inquiry and a briefing that whether such Indian operations targeting the Sikh political opponents also involve US territory. So I think this is no longer a bilateral issue between Canada and India, and is increasingly becoming a global issue of concern, which has badly dented Indian status and international image.
Ali, taking forward your words, if this has caught the headlines in the global media, if it is being widely believed by eminent politicians from around the world, including that in the United States, how difficult it has become for the US's government to stay silent on this issue. They haven't taken a sweep. They haven't issued a sweeping statement as yet. And this is also with regards to the relationship that they enjoy with Canada. How do you see, how plausible is this continuation of silence from the US side?
I think that's a very important question. And if you look at the balance sheet in terms of the convergence of interest that the US has with Canada and compare it vis-a-vis Washington's interest with New Delhi, there are three things which are exceptional and permanent in terms of US-Canada relations. Number one, and most important permanent factor is that Canada is the US largest neighbor. So, and they also share the same language, religion, value system. They are also both member of NATO. They are also member of the closest intelligence alliance in the world, the I-5. And they also share the ballistic missile defense system, which is NORAD, against any future nuclear threat. So this is an exceptional geographical, historical, cultural, and strategic relationship. Not considered seriously most of the time. When you compare it with India, I think in the last 20 years, India has been wooed by Washington, obviously in helping find a regional geostrategic partner to help contain and pressurize and encircle China in Asia Pacific. However, in the recent few years, I think the US strategic leadership and thinkers are beginning to recognize the limits of Indian security commitment towards US interests, and also the limits of their commitment against China, because they have a thriving and growing $120 billion bilateral trade with China. So that, and after the Ukraine war, the US also noticed that India was neutral. And so it is raising questions that India is not really committed wholeheartedly with the US long-term Asia Pacific strategy. So there are spaces, and this event has really sort of alarmed people in the US. And lastly, very interesting revelation made by the US ambassador to Canada, that actually some of the evidences related to the killing of the Sikh leader in Canada were shared by the US intelligence with the Canadian government. So I think the US is walking a very tight rope, and they have a very delicate balancing act. But I'm sure in future years and months to come, they cannot overlook this irresponsible Indian behavior towards the Western world, and it will affect how things pan out between the Western world and India in the years and days to come.
Ali, in a clearly Bollywood type of response, the Indian media have started doing the character assassination of the Canadian Prime Minister. They are now creating evidence that he is on drugs and saying things that are against the diplomatic norms. How will this fire back? What can happen in response to all of this?
I think it's a very important question. I see three contradictory approaches by India, which indicates that they are not clear, and they are also unnerved and shocked by the world reaction to their irresponsible use of force against another sovereign countries in another continent. And the first reaction was dismissal, because in the last 3 months, a number of high-level Canadian intelligence and security officials visited India demanding inquiry and cooperation, but they did not offer any. So the first reaction from India was that of not cooperating. When it received the international attention after the Canadian Prime Minister took his parliament into confidence, then the second reaction was that of dismissal, and the third reaction was to actually blame Canada that they are harboring terrorists rather than cooperate with them in the investigation. And the fourth and the final and the most ridiculous reaction from India is to try to divert attention and by blaming Pakistan and Pakistan's intelligence agencies that they have done this to put India in a bad light. So if you track and analyze these four reactions, it indicates there is lack of coherence, there is lack of clarity, but the common purpose of all these four contradictory narratives is to divert international attention and not offer a commitment, a clear, unambiguous commitment that they will cooperate in the investigation with Canada and they will offer, compensation or help identify the culprit. So that proves and that further reinforces the perception that India is trying to divert attention and has a lot of skeletons to hide in its cupboard.
Thank you very much, Syed Muhammad Ali, for being guest in our show.
Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, this was our last guest in the show, Syed Muhammad Ali, and as he has pointed out, India has clearly overstepped this time, has miscalculated its soft power, its influence in the Western capitals, and this is going to certainly fire back. Second and more important thing, as we have been identifying through the platform of this program, the pot of hatred is simmering, and if it rips off, it is going to dent the very structure of Indians' society and Indians' polity at large. And lastly, the problems between Sikhs and Hindus will only escalate further if India is trying to hide such a cruel act of assassination of a Sikh leader. We'll join you next week with another program. And until then, Allah Hafiz.